Let's kneel for prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are thankful for this morning and this evening, wherever we are, and the time that we have to study together. We ask for your Holy Spirit, Lord, to be our teacher. We know we have a short time before July 18th, and we are trying to understand, Lord, our place and our responsibility and how this message is going to develop. And we know, Lord, that we can look back at the past and we can see how you worked in past histories, and we know that we can bring these together on a line in the present. But there's confusion in our minds at times of how this works. And so we just ask that your Holy Spirit can be here to help us to put these things together, and that this presentation will be clear, and that it will not cause confusion. And we pray for each person who's been watching these videos and been participating. We know, Lord, that you are giving us light. We ask that this light can shine, and we pray and thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Very straight line.
You're recording, right?
Yeah, I'm recording. So I'm just going to give this, obviously I keep repeating all these ideas. The spirit of darkness, the time of the end. We have 1798 here, the Millerite line. We have an increase of knowledge, which we would mark, 1818 with Miller. We would have then the formalization of the message in 1833. And then we would have the message being empowered on August 11th. (1840). And we would mark this as the first angel arrives, first angel is formalized, and the first angel is empowered. And then we would have April 19th, 1844, which we have as the first day of the first month. And this would be the arrival of the second angel. And then we would have July 21st, 1844, fifth day of the fourth month. And this would be the second angel is formalized. And then we would have August 15th, 1844. This is the first day of the fifth month. We'd have the second angel empowered. And then we would have October 22, 1844. That's the 10th day of the seventh month. And that's the arrival of the third angel. And so this line has been our pattern, and it's changed over time. Now, we did do a study on the thunders and realized that in our history, this line is now being understood. And that's the unsealing of the seven thunders. It's the unsealing of this history, which wasn't really fully comprehended. And it's unsealed in our history as we pass through these waymarks. Now, it doesn't happen that we pass through the waymarks, or that we pass through the waymarks in order, but we understand different waymarks as we pass through our waymarks. That is, the events that happen in our time shine light upon these past events. And then these past events would then show us what's coming ahead. So as we came to understand Millerite history, it expanded on the understanding of our lines. But we have to pass through waymarks in order for that to occur. We couldn't it just wouldn't happen by us not acting. We had to act. We had to act on the light that was given us and continue to walk in that light. So these lines here, we remember that there was two groups, Protestants and Millerites. And Jeff dealt with this yesterday a little bit. He dealt with somewhat with this, not as in much detail, or maybe not in the same way. But he talked about that the Protestant horn fell, and that fell on April 19th. So he was dealing with the horns. So if you're going to deal with a horn, this is the Protestant horn, and it falls. Called P. So the Protestant horn falls on April 19th, 1844. Now, this group of Protestants, they had this opportunity, but they failed in taking that opportunity. Now, these are also Protestants. So the Millerites are Protestants. There's not really a lot of Catholics that join the Millerite movement. There's not a lot of Catholics in the United States, but this is really a Protestant movement. And, Miller is a Baptist. Some of them were Methodists, like Ellen White was a Methodist. And so, this group of people here, they're going to be tested when the third angel arrives. Now, when the third angel arrives, we're going to have this change in dispensation. So there's such a thing as dispensationalism, but it's not the evangelical form. But we have now this new movement. And of course, Christ is beginning a work in the heavenly sanctuary called the investigative judgment on the Day of Atonement. He's in the antitypical Day of Atonement. And Protestants who don't receive this light, they go into darkness. Now, the Adventists also have this opportunity, but they also go into darkness as well. That is, they enter in the first generation, they begin to fall away. And we know that Adventism continues to fall away. It's a progressive turning to Protestantism. And we know that when we get the way that Jeff dealt with it, so I'm going to draw our line here. So again, we got this darkness of the fourth generation, and we get to 1989. And this is our time of the end. And so in this case, we're going to have this increase of light. We're going to have all these things. And trying to put this here, a date, I think I would put 1993. And then this would be 1996. These are the first presentations that Jeff did on the line upon line system. So you have the basic ideas understood. 1996. This is formalized, though, with the Time of the End magazine. So there's this increase of light, the formalization, and then we get the first angels empowered at 9/11. But we also know that 9/11 was the arrival of the second angel. So it fulfills two roles. So we're just going to keep, I'm not going to write those underneath there. We can see that they line up. Now, the thing that we dealt with last time is we know that there are two groups. But you're trying to understand that, we often say first the church, then the world. And yet when we look at this line, part of the problem that we've had is we've taken this history and we've actually applied it to different groups. Now we know if we're going to look at this line in, we're going to deal with this close of probation, this would be the close of probation. Right? So if you wanted to look at it that way, October 22nd, 1844, obviously lines up with the close of probation for the world. But between 9/11 and the close of probation, we have a lot more waymarks than here. And that's because we're doing things within a fractal or within a wheel within wheels. So we know that where there's these groups, priests, Levites, Nethinim, and we've created these lines that are staggered like this, where you got, the waymarks on each of these lines. Not going to draw them all out. And, so you got the priest line, the Levites line, and the Nethinim line. And each of these lines start later and they end later. But there's nothing like this in Millerite history. And so I understand the principles behind this, but I think there's been a misapplication, in my view, of how we've understood these lines. And I can look back and I can see why in 2018 the lines had developed to the way that they were, because this was meant to bring in this new movement. So it was purposeful why these lines were not consistent and why they were done in the way that they were, which I'm not going to go into detail about all the error. Now, And they were using a type of dispensationalism that allowed them to do this, which was an evangelical dispensationalism that allowed them to create this new movement that has new truths and a new message and is not built upon the foundation that was laid in the beginning of this message. And we can see obviously here, if you look at Millerite history, the foundation is being laid here. And this message continues all the way through to the arrival of the third angel. And this foundation isn't rejected after 1844. In fact, the ones who reject the foundation are the ones who are in error. The ones who accept the foundation, the Seventh-day Adventists, recognize that this movement was correct, that the chronology was correct. Now, we also know that within this movement there was another line. So there is more than one line. And I could say we could almost have sort of two different groups. One is we have Lich. So Lich is, of course, is a person, and we have Snow. And they represent something, both of them. Lich has a message that's going to be empowered at the close of probation, and it's a message based upon definite time. And we also have another message that's based on definite time, and that's Snow's message. So I'm just going to put Lich here, and I'm going to put Snow here. And this goes back to one of Jeff's earlier presentations, where he deals with these two definite times. And we know that we can take the definite time here, August 11th, 1840, and we can lay it over top of October 22nd. That is, they both are testifying to this definite time. Now, in our history, we didn't have a definite time for 9/11, right? And in either, obviously there's one 9/11, but we weren't predicting it. We weren't even predicting the event of 9/11, even though we had other people in the past who were talking about this event, like Lewis F. Weir. Jeff is not looking for the Soviet Union to fall. In this history, his message is, for the most part, not addressing Islam. There is one study which I believe was done in the year 2000. Jeff doesn't remember doing it, but it was just a study on the woes. And he made a conclusion that radical Islam would attack the United States. And he tries to say he must have done that afterwards. The thing is, he hasn't been able to show me that he did it afterwards. In the paper that it's in, it's all material that's from the year 2000. And it appears that this was just a study that was done in the year 2000 regarding the woes, but it was completely forgot about when 9/11 happened. Jeff never thought about it, that he had done this study or that he had made that prediction, per se, that radical Islam was going to attack the United States. And there's nothing in that study that shows that it was written afterwards. If you had written that study afterwards, you would have had quite different language and quite different conclusions than the whole paper, that whole article. So Mark, yes?
Question for you. What was the event in 1996 you have listed there?
This is the publication of the Time of the End magazine. So that's the formalization of the message. So Jeff had been studying, starting in 1989, line upon line. He did a paper in 1993 and some presentations. But until 1996, we have the Time of the End magazine that formalizes the message. And so that's why we mark this to parallel 1833. And that these two papers here are basically our foundational message, but it's more specifically this paper lays it out in much more detail. And all the principles that are laid down in the Time of the End magazine are still valid principles, all the teachings in that. The only thing that was different is when he was looking back here at the fall of the Soviet Union, he didn't realize that Russia did not fall, right? Because he just said, well, the Soviet Union fell. So that wasn't until our history that we start to realize that there was something that we didn't understand fully.
So
Yeah.
So the first angel that's formalized there in 96, that formalization there, as you have it in line upon line,
Yeah.
That formalization included, would you say it included all the three lines, the priests, the Levites, and the Nethinims? Or was it more at that point only for the priests?
Okay, so this is a good question. And this is something that I have a problem with, is that I don't have the Levites and the Nethinim start later. In the way that I understand the lines, the time of the end is the time of the end for every line. Now, I know that goes contrary to what Jeff had taught for years, but, and maybe there's some there's something valid about what he's saying. Obviously, that different groups are going to sort of start coming in at later times. But, we talked about, one is the agricultural line. We talked about the plowing for the priests and the plowing for the Levites. And to me, it's the same mistake as trying to look at individuals and say that individuals, somebody can't be in this line because, he didn't accept the message till later, so he can't be a priest, which doesn't make sense because you have 11th hour workers in each of these groups. But this history is laying the foundation. Now, different groups are going to come in and understand this, but this is still the plowing for all the groups, if you want to put it that way, in my opinion of it, because this is the foundation. There isn't another foundation that's laid later for the Levites and another foundation laid later for the Nethinim. They all go back to this history. So that, to me, the time of the end should be the time of the end for every line.
Yeah. So in a way, you could almost say that off of that line, you could do a dash line down to a new line, meaning that everything before the dash line on the left is still part of that line.
Right.
And I think you guys do it by just putting another line underneath, and that's no problem.
Right. So that's the way I would do it. And now, because God's dealings with men is ever the same, but it's this history that they have to look back to understand the message, right? Because the foundation is here. So when you start to move the lines over like they do, well, then you can say, well, this group doesn't even need this, right?
It does. But it does, right?
It does need this. But you can argument, well, their time of the end, let's say, is 9/11. And then, well, they don't need all this stuff before here because now that's going to be their time of the end. And this would then be a period of darkness, right? Because you have to have a period of darkness precede the time of the end. And so just like you can't take individuals and do that, you can't do that with these groups or with these lines. That would be my argument or contention. So this foundation then that's laid would parallel this history. Now, we're going to deal with Lich here in this history as well, and Snow, because this to me is, of course, not referring to an individual in this line. This is referring to a message in this line. But I'll deal with Snow first. I'll come back to Lich later. So when we have Samuel Snow in this line, and are we going to argue that he's the priests or the Millerites? Well, we know that he's a person giving a message to the Millerites. So he's a separate group because he's the one giving the message. And really, in our line, we've paralleled for the most part the Millerites with the Levites, because we would talk about 9/11. So if I'm going to just do the Levites line here, I'll do it like this. So this is the Levites, which are Seventh-day Adventists. Maybe I'll do it here. So we got 9/11 here. So this would be the first day of the first month. And then we're going to have the fifth day of the fourth month, midnight. And then we're going to have the first day of the fifth month. And then we're going to have the Sunday law. So this is what Jeff has taught for years. He parallels the Sunday law with October 22nd. And the Sunday law is the close of probation for Seventh-day Adventists. So this obviously is the big line. This is a fractal within this. So I could have drawn this within here, right? Because this is this, and this goes to a waymark here, which we would then call the Sunday law. And then we would have this other line in between here, which would be the loud cry. right? So we have the loud cry in there. But this would be the line of the 144,000. But we know that in here is this line of the Levites. So what we were doing is we were doing this. We would put midnight in here and the midnight cry. But there were probably, and we would call this Raphia and this Penium. And this is really from the line of the Levites. But when we look at it in this line, we're taking this history and applying it to the Levites. That is, we're not applying it to the big line per se, right? Primarily, Jeff has always looked at this history here in Millerite history as the history from 9/11 to the Sunday law, right? So does that make sense? What I'm saying there, Chris? Does that?
Yeah, it makes sense. I think I've been understanding more or less what the message is about this, but I've just been trying to sort it out in my head. And
Right. But this is how Jeff has done it, right? Now, Parminder in 2018, he started to do something that Jeff didn't like, and that is he made another line. So this would be the line of the priests. So you have the first day of the first month is going to be 9/11. And it's going to look just like this line. But this here, the close of probation that's going to happen for the priests is going to happen earlier, right? The priest probation closed on November 9th. And that happens before the actual Sunday law. So you'd have this other line within here, and this is Raphia. Raphia is November 9th. So you're going to have the line of the priests inside here. And in doing that, I'm going to draw it like this. So don't, even though I'm putting these waymarks below them, they're not happening at the same time. They're happening earlier. And we said that 2014 was the Sunday law, right? That's what Parminder argued. But when he's talking about that, all he's talking about is he's saying in Millerite history, it's the same waymark that we have here. This waymark here is going to be what we call the Sunday law. So if we were going to put this in here, and you were going to take Millerite history, and you were going to put the line of the priests in here, and you were going to do the first day of the first month, the fifth day of the fourth month, the first day of the fifth month, and the 10th day of the seventh month, this would line up with the waymark that is the Sunday law. But yet it's 2014. Now, he had originally in 2012 predicted an actual Sunday law, but then he tried to argue afterwards that this still was the Sunday law. Now, I think he's correct. That is, 2014 marks this period from midnight to the midnight cry. Now, the midnight cry occurs in 2018, and that's on October 13th. So from October 3rd to October 13th is the midnight cry. Now, more light still comes after that, because during the midnight cry, the message is swelling, and then we're going to have, in 2019, we're going to have the close of probation. And so this is lining up here. This close of probation here lines up with Raphia. But in this line here, this is Millerite history. This is the Sunday law. But if you look at the big line has these waymarks. They have, the first day of the first month, the fifth day of the fourth month, the first day of the fifth month, and the 10th day of the seventh month. So you can see that in the big line, the symbol of the fifth day of the fourth month lines up with the Sunday law. The first day of the fifth month lines up with the loud cry, right? So we could put that there. And then we would have the close of probation is going to line up with the 10th day of the seventh month. But that's on the big line. So then when we look at our line that we're talking about right now coming up to the Sunday law, this is the line of the Levites. But the line of the Levites, Raphia, is November 9th. So this is then going to go like this. You're going to have that dashed line in that same spot.
mm,
Okay? And that
okay.
to me is consistent and makes sense. Now, the other thing, though, is they want to create this line of the Nethinim. And I don't think you can do a line of the Nethinim. It is the Nethinim join with the Levites. And they're going to join with the Levites here in this history between what we would call the first day of the fifth month, which is going to be Paneum, and the Sunday law. Because in the big line, they're going to be joining here in this history between 9/11 and the Sunday law. That's when the Nethinim join with the Levites. Because the Nethinim and the Levites and the priests all deal with the temple. But the Protestant horn that fell here in this history, we say that the Republican horn fell here. This is what Jeff says. Now, of course, it's a progressive to some degree, but he lays up Agag and the witch of Endor, and and then we can deal here with this being spiritual formation in September of 2001, when the church requires that all of our pastors be trained in spiritual formation, and this is so they can get accreditation from Protestant universities, so that Protestants can go to our universities to take ministerial training if they want. That's sort of the reasoning. The reasoning is, well, if we are accredited by these Protestant colleges and universities, then those Protestants can send people to our church to get training, and it'll be accredited so that they can then go back to their churches, and we can be an influence on the Protestant world. That's what Adventism, that's the reasoning that they did this.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not necessarily understanding what all this spiritual formation is about. Like the administrators at the top don't really know what they're doing. They're going from advice from lower down. And this is something that the Protestants want, is this spiritual formation. It's part of their training. So Adventism goes to the Witch of Endor in September of 2001. And of course, that lines up with 9/11. So when we look at this Protestant horn, we know that Republicanism begins to fall here as well. So we have, for the Seventh-day Adventist Church, we have this waymark. But we know that Protestantism itself has already been falling ever since, this history. So they fell here. And then Republicanism, which is the government, they are also making concessions all along through this history. But I would argue that the Republican horn really falls at the Sunday law itself. So I really wouldn't put the Republican horn falling here. You could place it there. Now, the other thing that he brought up, of course, was the Patriot Act. So
Right.
that's where you bring in Roman law, which is you're guilty until proved innocent, rather than English law, where you're innocent until proved guilty. So when it comes to that principle, we can see that this begins to happen. But that's why this is foundational in the American government. All this stuff against terrorism and everything is what can lead to the Sunday law.
Yes.
It can be terrorism. It can be classified as terrorism, as rebellion. We're not sure exactly how it's going to look, but we do know, based on this pandemic that has happened, and what we're seeing with riots and so forth, that the government has a lot of power, and it can exercise that power, and that's not always going to make sense, but it does make sense to the government, because they have to maintain order, and so they're going to look at this Sunday law that comes in as a way of maintaining order. So the reasons behind it are going to be given differently. They're not going to be what we would think were the reasons that they would use, that we need to keep Holy Sunday, but they're going to be other reasons that they bring in this Sunday law initially. But it will develop and progressively become worse. But
Issues like global warming.
Yeah, so we know that the Sunday law, when it comes after December 25th, whether it's December 26th, that's the first day that you have to keep Sunday, I don't know, but I do know that the line of the priest ends at the Sunday law, because if you take this line of the priests, you can see that this line ends, well, this is the line of the, this is the line of the priests. This is the line of, I'm getting confused which line I'm looking at. Yeah, so this is the line of the priests here, right? And so the line of the priests is and when I say this, that it ends, this is the second coming. So this is going to be 2021. So the line of the priests has a close of probation in 2019 on November 9th. But the second coming is the next waymark in all of these. So even in October 22nd, you can see the next waymark really is the second coming. In this one, the close of probation on the big line, the second coming is here. That's just because this line here fits in here. From October 22nd, this is the Day of Atonement. You have the Day of Atonement. At the Day of Atonement, when it ends, Christ is going to come, right? Because this is the close of probation for that history. But we now have another time at the end, and we can fit this line in here because you got 4 generations, and then you have another reform line. But then when we look at, so that's the line of the big line, and then you have the line of the Levites. So their second coming, in that context, is going to be, at the close of probation or maybe a loud cry. I'm not sure how you would look at that. But the point is, their line is going to end, and I would put it at the close of probation. And then you have the line of our line, and we know that our line ends here at Penium. So after December 25th, the priests have no more line. Their line has ended. They are now just a part of the Levites, of that new movement. Now, so in my idea with the horns is that when the Republican horn falls here at the Sunday law, the Nethinim, and this is, it's just maybe, because Jeff is saying the same thing. He's saying the Protestants are joining here to stand with us at the Sunday law. That's the joining of the two sticks. And just to clarify that, we know that in between 1798 and 1844, that we have a 2520 end here and a 2520 end here. And this is Northern Israel's 2520. And Northern Israel is a type of the United States. So 2-horn power. They have 2 golden calves, Dan and Bethel, church and state. We have the same thing here for the United States. It's a 2-horn beast. And it arises at the end of that 2520 for Northern Israel. And that's the Protestants. But their horn is going to fall. But the Millerites also have a 2520 that ends here, I should say, the Judah. And when that 2520 ends, God's going to form a new church that's going to be God's denominated people, the Seventh-day Adventists. And they're going to form in this history. And they have this opportunity. If the Millerites had continued, Christ could have come before now. If the majority of the people had accepted that message and accomplished their work, but instead they fell away. Now, so we have the Protestants falling here, and we have the Republican horn falling in this history. And we can start it here, so I'm not saying we can't, but it's going to still be a progressive fall of that Republican horn that's going to manifest itself in the Sunday law here. So from here to here is going to be that fall of the Republican horn. And we know here then that the Protestants are going to join with us, some of them, not all of them, because the Republican horn, when it falls, many Protestants will see that this is contrary to the principles of the gospel and Christ and the Bible. And many of them already see the papacy as the Antichrist, and they're going to see the papacy working here in this history, not just the United States, but primarily they're going to see the United States, but they're still going to have to recognize the image of the beast. And the image of the beast is this church and state that's combined. So they're going to join with us here in this history, and they're going to stand with us at the Sunday law. Now, so the lines of the Nethinim, I would just say that the Nethinim are the Protestants because they are connected with the temple. And yet we also know that if the Nethinim join here and they stand with it the Sunday law, well, who are they preaching to here? Because this is the Sunday law test. So there's another test that has to happen here in the big line. So from the Sunday law to the close of probation, and we study Daniel 11, verse 40 to 45, we have Edom, Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon that are going to escape out of the hand of the papacy. These are the ones that escape. And this can't be the Nephilim that are talked about. So we've tried to line it up with the Nephilim, but this happens after the Sunday law. So to me, it seems clear that you have the people who stand at the Sunday law are the people who are going to be presenting in this message the loud cry. And they're going to stand up as an ensign. We lift it up as an ensign, as a witness. And the people here aren't won by argument as much as by the unction of the Holy Spirit. People receive a conviction because of the character of these people who have stood in this testing time. And that's why the loud cry can go forth. And so when probation closes, people have all made a choice because we've had a manifestation of Christ's character in his people that has been so convincing that people have all made a choice. And so when Jesus says, let him that is righteous be righteous still, and him that is wicked be wicked still, the righteousness are not going to turn from their righteousness during the plagues and the time of Jacob's trouble. And the wicked are not going to turn from their wickedness. You know, at some point, every knee will bow and every tongue confess, you know, during the great white throne judgment. But none of the wicked are changed by their experience. They still have the same character. And so to me, this makes consistency. It's consistent. Now, if I try to fit in the line of the Nephilim, we run into some problems. And I'm not going to draw out Parminder's lines, but he switched things around in these lines, even using his agricultural model. So one of the things about the priests that he had is the priests actually have nobody to preach to them. They're developing the message. But he has a very similar line with the Nephilim. And it just doesn't even make sense to have the Nephilim have their line end on at the close of probation, when this would be all kinds of people that haven't stood at the Sunday law. So if you have people that stand at the Sunday law or coming in this history, why do you even have this history? Now, the other error that was brought in is that Parminder was teaching that the 144,000 are made up only of the priests. So this group of people, so when probation closed on November 9th, 2019, the 144,000, the number of the 144,000 would have been made up, and they would be a symbolic number. That is, nobody else after this period of time can become a priest. And because they can't become a priest, they can't become one of the 144,000. That's Parminder's argument. And of course, there's not 144,000 people in the Omega movement, the Omega apostasy. There's not that many people. So, so they had to make it a symbolic number. But if we look at it, that the 144,000 are priests and Levites, and maybe even Nethinim, anybody who has received the seal of God and understands the truth enough to go through the time of Jacob's trouble, to stand in the sight of the holy of God without a mediator, they will be the 144,000. Because those people, they'll have martyrs in this history, but the people that are alive, that God says, let to him that is righteous be righteous still, they will be able to demonstrate perfectly Christ's character in the most trying times. And even without a mediator, that is, they're not going to sin. So they have to have an understanding of the gospel and an experience in the gospel that is not superficial. It has to be that they trust God and they do not trust self. They're not depending upon their righteousness and what they see in themselves. They're depending solely upon God in spite of what they see in themselves. And so they fear that they have unrepentant sins. And all they see in themselves as sinners. They don't see themselves as righteous, but they cling to God's promises. And because of that, they will be alive to see Christ return in the clouds of heaven. So to me, this is basically the lines. This is how I understand them. So any thoughts or any questions on this?
I have some questions. So the Levite line is basically the Levite and Nethinim line. We shouldn't just be calling it Levite line, we should be calling it Levites and Nethinims.
No, because the Levites, well, you could say they were together if you wanted to. But the thing is, the Levites are Seventh-day Adventists and the Nethinims are Protestants. And so that's the result of the joining of the two sticks. The Protestants will join with Seventh-day Adventists because they fell away in 1844. They failed that test. But Protestants now alive today have that opportunity. And because of their connection with the temple, that is because they're Christians and they understand the Bible, and many of them are converted people who have been studying. They've not been Seventh-day Adventists, but many of them are keeping the Sabbath. Many of them already recognize the Pope as the Antichrist. Many of them already have a lot of truth in their understanding of end-time prophecy. So I'm not talking about just the Protestants out there who are nominal and who believe in all kinds of crazy things. I'm talking about the people who aren't connected with Seventh-day Adventist Church, but actually have been studying the truth, and they're Protestants. And I've run into lots of those people going door to door. When I used to do my scripture songs door to door, I'd run into all kinds of people who were Christians who didn't go to church, wanted nothing to do with the Protestant churches, and understood, if I talked to them about righteousness by faith, they would understand overcoming sin. Some of them were Sabbath keepers. Some weren't because they had never heard about it. So I'd share with them. Some understood the state of the dead. Some understood many, many things that we understand as Seventh-day Adventists, but they weren't Seventh-day Adventists. And so they can't be the Levites. So they can't. So what I say is that there is no Nethinim line. That's my argument, is there's a line of the priests and the line of the Levites. The Nethinim are just the Protestants who join with the Levites. They don't have a separate line. That's my argument. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Okay, so just one more question. So you're making a difference between the Nethinim Protestants and other Protestants. You wouldn't be saying, for instance, that comes to Sunday law, close of probation is for the Protestants.
Right.
Saying that?
No, that you don't have a separate line. Now, I would think that the close of probation for everyone is the close of probation for the world. So when we talk about these other close of probations, like what happened on November 9th, 2019, we're not perfect. We weren't, God didn't say, let him that is righteous be righteous still. It wasn't Daniel 12:1. That didn't happen on November 9th. But we know that some people had actually sealed their fate because they rejected light. And that light, once they rejected it, there was no way that they could accept it again. That is, they would just go further into darkness, and that's the false priests. So the false priests have gone further and further into darkness. They're not going to get out of that darkness, no matter how much light comes to them. Now, when I say that, I always discount individuals, because when I talk about the false priests, I'm talking about within a line. Now, God knows the hearts of individuals. There may be individuals who are caught up in that movement who, as individuals, never understood the truth and actually had a desire to know the truth but were misled, and who could, as individuals, end up on the side of truth. That is, they will stand at the Sunday law. But as far as the group of false priests is concerned, their probation closed November 9th to 15th. That's when they had that opportunity to accept the truth. Now, we also know that when we have the close of probation that's going to happen at the Sunday law, the peoples whose probation are going to close are the ones who reject the Sunday law. That is, the individuals who are going to not stand on the side of truth. They will have sealed their fate. That is, no amount of light is going to be able to come to them to enable them to once again stand for the truth, even if they had stood for the truth in the past, even if they'd been Seventh-day Adventists in the past. Once that test comes to them, their probation is closed. But the ones who pass through that test I mean, people still have to go through a lot to get to the close of probation for the world. And
Yes.
so I wouldn't argue that everybody who initially passed the Sunday law test is sealed and has a perfect character. That's not going to happen until, I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't people with perfect characters, because there probably are. But that's not what's happening at the close of probation for the Sunday law. It's more, these close of probations are more about for the wicked than for the righteous. The righteous are still going to have to go through an experience to get to the close of probation for the world. And part of that experience is that they have to pass that Sunday law test, and then they have to give their testimony. They have to reveal Christ's character. And if they fail in that, they're not going to be able to stand in time of Jacob's trouble. So they're not going to be one of the 144,000. And now I'm not saying that, you know, there's some people, they're just not going to have the knowledge or the experience to live in the sight of the holy God without a mediator. Some of them may be able to be martyrs, but they're not going to be able to be one of the 144,000.
There will
So,
be
yeah,
martyrs.
a question?
I say there will be many martyrs.
Yes, many martyrs. And it's way easier to die for Christ than it is to live for Christ.
Yes.
You know, because all your labors are over. All the pain's over, you know, in a very quick moment of time once you die for Christ. But to actually have to live, Ellen White says regarding the time of Jacob's trouble that most events are worse in their anticipation than in their reality. But she said that time of Jacob's trouble is going to be worse than anything we can anticipate or imagine. It's going to be a test that's unlike anything we have ever experienced. And even though we have to go through a great experience, when we get to that experience, the time of Jacob's trouble, we're going to experience what Jesus experienced at the cross, that same choice, you know. And Christ said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? That separation that he felt from God, that same separation we're going to feel. So we'll have nothing to recommend ourselves to God. We won't be able to see our lives as this perfect lives, and we know that we're saved. All we can appeal to is what we know to be true. And that's what God has done, not anything we have done. So, you know, so to me, you know, when we start talking about the closes of probation, you know, these are typical of the close of probation in that there are groups who are closing their probation because of light that's rejected. But we know that the close of probation for the world with Daniel 12:1 is a unique event. It doesn't happen again and again. It happens one time. And when it occurs, all those people who have gone through that history that we don't even really understand yet, because even though God is giving us light, he's not giving us a great deal of light about that history, or that, you know, that's going to happen. It's not a history yet, but it will be a history. He's not giving us a lot of information about it because we don't need it right now. But we can see in it, in the lines that we're going through, we can see how they parallel that. So what this movement is going through right now is paralleling what's going to happen in the future. But it's still not as intense by any stretch of the imagination as what's going to be happening. You know, we're not right now being threatened by death. You know, there isn't going to be a death decree in this initial Sunday law. But we are going to have a death decree after the close of probation in that Sunday law. And we know, of course, that the weapons that they come at us with, they will just fall from their hands. Like, I can't remember the word she uses. But, you know, we know that we're going to be protected. We're not going to be killed during that time. There'll be no martyrs after the close of probation. So this is well known by Seventh-day Adventists. And there's nothing that in this message that we have learned that contradicts anything that we have understood regarding these events, because these are clearly marked in the spirit of prophecy. The reason why we believe these things is because Ellen White has laid it all out for us. And so we know as Seventh-day Adventists that the experience that we're going through now is not the real experience. I call it a typical line. The priest line is typical. But it does have realities, external realities and events tied to it. But they're not the events that are on the big line. Those events are much bigger, much more dramatic, much more worldwide and extensive. They're external events, and they're they're devastating to this earth, because in the end, this earth is going to be destroyed. So, so we're going through this line right now, the line of the priests, but we're also looking at waymarks in the line of the Levites. And so that's been part of the problem, is that we haven't fully understood what the line of the priests is and the line of the Levites. So then if you're going to look at the line of the priests and you're going to try to say, where would that be in Millerite history? The only way that I can line it up is I would have to line up the priests, Ezekiel, Snow, and the priests as the same group of people, right? So Ezekiel, he's Samuel Snow, and the priests have to be Samuel Snow. And that's the thing, is that we haven't really understood, because we've always looked at individuals coming into this movement as being Samuel Snow. Now, when it comes to Lich, so this is a bit of speculation on my part, but I would actually argue that Lich is FFA. And so Lich doesn't represent Jeff per se, because Jeff, he typifies a lot of the work of Miller. I mean, he's there at the time of the end. Lich isn't. But what the work that Jeff has done, or FFA has done, with Jeff as its leadership, is typified by Josiah Lich. And I don't know, I haven't broken it down into all the details, but when I look at what Snow does, what the priests do, the priests are dependent upon Lich. Ezekiel is dependent upon the prophecy of Josiah. Samuel Snow is dependent upon the prophecy of Josiah Lich, the year-day principle. And now he's also building upon Miller as well. So we can see in Millerite history, you have Miller and you have Lich. Miller doesn't make that prediction that Lich does. Now, Miller does have a prediction, and his prediction ends at sunset on April 18th, 1844. But his prediction had constantly been adjusting as well, and it wasn't even necessarily adjusted by him. But we do know that Lich had a prediction, and his prediction was fulfilled. And so if we're going to look at the lines, and you're going to try to compare them, there's different ways that you can do that. Now, what Jeff has done is he's laid up October 22nd with August 11th, 1840. That is, he says that they're parallel. But we know August 11th, 1840 wasn't a close of probation. But the nature of those has to do with the time, that this was a precise time. Now, in our line, we have two different predictions. We have the November 9th prediction, and the November 9th prediction is a prediction that comes, let's say it comes from FFA. Now, we could say it's the line of the priests, but I'm going to try to parallel that with Josiah Lich's prediction. It's a definite day. But then we have July 18th. Now, July 18th is also this prediction about a definite time. And we could also argue December 25th is as well. So I don't think I've worked out all the details, but my argument is that we have within what we would call the bigger FFA, we have the true priests and the false priests. We had all kinds of hangers-on. We had the mixed multitude. There's all different kinds of things that happen, and those groups ended up splitting. And if you look at Millerite history, you can see that sort of thing happening. But we know that we have this foundational understanding that Snow is going to use. And then we have this other understanding, November 9th, and we're going to be using that same understanding to come to July 18th. And it's not about any of the individuals involved in that. It's about the group of the priests, and the ones who actually make that prediction pass through that earlier experience, right? So the priests, the false priests fall away at November 9th, and then you have, for the first time, this July 18th prediction being made manifest. Now, individuals understood it in the past, but the thing is, it's the movement of the priests that is giving that prediction. It's about the priests not about any of the individuals in that line. And that's the way that I would try to look at that. So I would say that the priests are snow. So I hope that's clear. Does that, I don't know, Stephen, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'd have to listen to it again,
Okay.
what you're saying, just to grasp it.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's just that, you know, if I'm going to look at all the different groups that we have, I would say that Millerite history should give us the groups that we need to look at our history and to recognize the groups that we have. That's what I'm saying. And if you look at October 22nd as the Sunday law, right, because that's from the line of the Levites, then we know that there's a work to do after the Sunday law. And that work was for the world. The door was closed for the Millerites on October 22nd, 1844, right? And the Protestants as well, you know, because the Millerites were Protestants. But we know that that gospel then was to go to the world. And so when we look at our line, we see the same thing. When we get to the Sunday law, the door is closed for Seventh-day Adventists and for the people who have joined, the Protestants who joined because though their horn had fallen, there are Protestants who are converted, and they're going to join with us at the Sunday law. But then there's still a message to give to the world, and that message can't be a message to people who haven't had an understanding and should have stood at the Sunday law, right? It's going to be to people who don't really know the truth, and they're going to see this ensign being lifted up. And that's what the Seventh-day Adventist Church should have been after 1844. The Millerites should have formed this new movement. They should have all accepted the Sabbath and the sanctuary and the state of the dead. And they should have been this ensign that was lifted up to give this gospel to the world. But they failed in that. And so we know that this is going to happen again after the Sunday law. But right now we're focused upon these waymarks that happened before the Sunday law, which are from the line of the Levites. And I think that just the only thing I think is, like, I think Jeff is correct, everything that he's saying. You know, the Protestants are going to join with us, the two sticks are going to be joined. But that he doesn't recognize that that's symbolized by the Nephilim. And that's the thing, is he doesn't have anything to symbolize that other than the Protestants. The Protestant horn falls, republicanism falls, and when it falls, when the image of the beast test occurs, Protestants will see it for what it is, like the true Protestants, and they will join with us. So then he just has this line at the Nephilim. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe my explanation isn't the best. But to me, it makes it consistent with Millerite history in the number of groups that you have. So you have, if you want to look at it in sort of another way of thinking about it, you got Protestants and Millerites here, and you have Lich and Snow. So if you look at our line, you got Seventh-day Adventists, right? And within Seventh-day Adventists, you have priests and Levites. Now, the institution itself is not what I call Seventh-day Adventist. The institution is passed by. So in this history, all this light, all this reform line is for Seventh-day Adventists, which are priests and Levites, not the organizational structure. The organizational structure will not be saved. Jerusalem will be destroyed. But the priests and the Levites, the Seventh-day Adventists, who are following God, will still stand at the Sunday law, right? So you got Seventh-day Adventists, and they're divided into two groups, priests and Levites. Now, we would also have here, when we look at here, so we're gonna take this here, we're gonna say this is Seventh-day Adventists. But Seventh-day Adventists is divided into two groups, priests and Levites, Protestants and Millerites. Now, we know that the Millerites are the Protestants, so they're part of this line. The Millerites don't start their time of the end somewhere over here. They start their time of the end here, just like the Protestants do. Now, you could argue that this is when the Millerites start their time of the end. You could try to argue that way. But then you would have to argue that this is a period of darkness, because the period of darkness always precedes the time of the end. But we know it's just that the Millerites are the group that passed through this history. So they get here, they've been Protestants this whole time. Now they pass through this history and they're now Millerites. In this history here, we're going to have priests and Levites. Now, in trying to divide it here, we know that these are Seventh-day Adventists. And when we look at the priests themselves, we know that the priests can't be just this history and then the Levites this history. We know that priests and Levites are Seventh-day Adventists. So in trying to understand this, we know that there's more than one group here. So this reform line that happens, we say that Protestants are being tested here, but we also know that there is Miller, and Miller represents this movement as well. So Miller represents this movement up to 9/11, but it still is a Protestant movement, right? Here it still is Seventh-day Adventist movement. And then you're going to have two groups, Snow and Millerites. Snow is going to be the priests. The Millerites are going to be the Levites. And yet this group here is still a part of this group. This group here is still a part of this group. Now, in trying to understand Lich, this is where, I'm still haven't totally understood or totally clear on how I could explain this. But we know that Lich is part of this foundational message, just as Miller is. So in this history, we have this movement, which is a Seventh-day Adventist movement. And we would, if we're going to parallel a person, we would say Jeff, but we could argue it's FFA. And then we have Lich. And the question is, who would Lich represent in this history? And I'm saying that there's a distinction between Jeff and FFA. And so there's a distinction here that we have to see, just like there's a distinction between Lich and the Protestants. So in this here you have Seventh-day Adventists, but you have FFA, which would be Miller and Lich. That is, Lich would represent the movement of FFA. Miller would represent Jeff himself, because Jeff is the one who's starting this line, and he's developing this movement. Lich comes and joins this movement. I think back in 38, I think is when he joined, or a bit before that. It might have even have joined earlier. I can't remember. I used to know when he joined. But Josiah Lich, it's this movement that starts to make these predictions. It's not Jeff making the predictions. It's not Miller making this prediction. So that's the way that I would try to understand that. So when we get here, we now have priests and Levites, which is Snow, and the Millerites. That's what's being paralleled here. And the Protestants, the Nethinim, are the Protestants who fell away here, who now are going to join in this history. So, maybe I'm wrong, but to me it makes much more sense. It's more consistent with the line above us. And we also dealt with the idea that this line is a structure where the third angel's message arrives here, and in this history, this is still the history of the third angel's message all the way through here. And that we don't actually have the third angel arrive in this history. The third angel is manifest. It's going to be empowered in this history. And specifically at the close of probation, when it says, let him that is righteous be righteous still, him that is filthy be filthy still. To me, that would be the first time that the third angel is empowered, because the third angel in every single line, in every history, is never empowered. It arrives at the third waymark, and then the second angel will arrive, or the fourth, however you want to look at it. And in that history, it's not going to be empowered. There's going to be a falling away. But you're not going to have a falling away that happens here. So when the third angel is finally empowered, not arrived, but empowered, then the work that was begun in that first gospel promise, that the seed of the woman would bruise the serpent's head and the serpent would bruise his heel, that will be fulfilled. It was partly fulfilled at the cross, we could say maybe it was formalized at the cross if you wanted to put it in, because there is a big line that actually goes right from creation to the second coming, which I have never dealt with, but there is a big line, and all of these other reform lines are fractals within those lines. Because yeah, the end and the beginning, obviously, you have the Alpha and the Omega. So does that help a little bit, Stephen?
It's a lot of information. So,
Okay, we'll watch it again,
yes.
figure out where I'm making mistakes. And
I'm not too sure about the lich thing equating to FFA. To me, I don't know. It's kind of new to me. I haven't really.
well, it's new. So it's new to me. But all I'm saying is that I'm connecting Lich's prediction with November 9th. And I'm connecting Snow's prediction with July 18th.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
And so obviously, it's not the same group. It's not the same individual in that history making those two predictions. It's two different individuals. So it must be two different groups. And obviously, Snow and Lich are part of this bigger movement. And so obviously FFA and the priests, it's just FFA is not the priests, because FFA is something else, right? You couldn't argue that FFA is the priests. The priests are a group of people who come to understand a certain truth, and they fulfill a line. And my argument is that FFA's line, its place, has ended. That is FFA, and I'm not trying to say that, you know, Jeff is in error and we're rejecting Jeff and we're rejecting FFA. I'm not. I'm just talking about from what happened in 2017 is the Holy Spirit took over the organization, while we were at the same time trying to make a human organization, which ended up turning into the Omega apostasy. So that was wrong ideas in 2017. The type of organization that they were doing was wrong. But we had organization happen in 2017. And that organization was under the guidance of the Holy Spirit. Christ became the head of that organization in 2017. And I try to explain that in the 777 chiasm structure of what happens in 2017 in the middle of that chiasm, that there was a change of leadership that occurred. And of course, Christ has always been leading this movement. So I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about as far as the message, where the message came from and who was then in control of what was happening. Because we could see that as far as the message was concerned, it had been taken totally out of the hands of FFA. The July 18 prediction, all these other things were not initiated by Jeff. Even the November 9th prediction was not initiated by Jeff per se, right? But it was the FFA movement that was making this prediction. That is, this organization. And when Jeff tried to hand the organization from himself to Parminder, he made a mistake, as he recognizes. And that mistake was to set up this new organization that would actually be opposed to the truth. And that organization began in 2017. But it had always been opposed to the truth right from its beginning. In 2017, when they began to organize, they were doing things secretively. They were doing things contrary to the gospel. They were teaching error. And that's, in a sense, FFA. Not that Jeff was doing that, but FFA was following that. And so when the organization was taken over by the Holy Spirit, other things happened. And I know maybe it's a bit controversial, and I don't want to be misunderstood, because in no way am I opposed to Jeff or to FFA. All I'm saying is that something happened that FFA wasn't in control of, and that was the Holy Spirit who was in control of all those things that were happening. And we could see the result. The result was we ended up with this new movement, which claims to be the continuation of Future for America. And they retain some of those a lot of some of the assets and so forth, websites and all those things, even though they've changed their names, some of them, to get away from Future for America. But still, my view is that there was a split. There was two organizations. You could call them parallel kingdoms if you wanted to, that were being set up in 2017. So, that's my understanding of it. It could be controversial. It could be taken as heresy if somebody took what I said out of context. But I think that it's very, very clear that what's happening now is the movement of the priests, and the movement of the priests is not organized or controlled by man. It's something like this July 18 prediction didn't come from man. It came from God, and it didn't come from one place. It came from all over. So God worked through all these different people who ended up on the right side of the issue. Okay, Chris, you have a comment?
Yeah, a question actually. Because I wasn't involved back in 9/11. My question has to do with if you combine the input from all those that are with us online right now, how many other prophetic organizations or teachers recognized 9/11, after it occurred, and saw that as, I believe, the fourth angel is what fourth angel that came down is what Jeff is saying. How many others recognized maybe not even that part of it, but recognized this was really a prophetic happening event and started to talk about it? Was FFA basically about the only one, or were there several others?
Well, initially, because when 1989 happened, I was there, and I saw that as a fulfillment of Daniel 11:40b. But I didn't see it as the time of the end, and I didn't become a part of Jeff's movement or anything. But I'm sure lots of people saw the significance of 1989, but the church did not. And then when 9/11 occurred, again, I recognized it as fulfillment of prophecy. And I remember lots of Adventists and lots of pastors, they even saw, testimonies 9/11, Ellen White's writing about what happened. But very quickly, that turned. Very quickly, probably pastors received it from the conference above them, that this is error, and, this is not true. 9/11 is not a fulfillment of prophecy. And so initially there were some groups, but nobody really had developed anything like what Jeff had developed, these lines that could explain 9/11 in context. Because when people saw these fulfillments of prophecy, and they might recognize them as fulfillments of prophecy, they had no context in which to interpret it. They didn't know that that was Revelation 18, and they didn't know that this was a repeat of Millerite history. But for Jeff, 9/11 empowered his message because he was doing the first angel's message. And so now it became clear that his lines were true, because now he could put that in that line. It had a purpose and a place. And as we've been fulfilling, because that's the unsealing of the seven seals. So as we went through these different histories, we then came to understand Millerite history better, right? So that's the unsealing of not the seven seals, the seven thunders, pardon me. So when the seven thunders uttered their voices, they sealed up the things which had happened in Millerite history. And so now we go through our history, and those seven thunders are unsealed in the events that this group experiences. And specifically, the seven thunders are actually unsealed in the line of the priests. So they're not unsealed in the line of the Levites, even though they're connected, or in the big line. The seven thunders are experienced, or are unsealed in the experience of this movement, the priests. So talking about 9/11, are there other groups? Now, every group that has left FFA has in some ways repudiated 9/11. Even though they might see it as a fulfillment of prophecy, some of them have interpreted it in completely different ways. So some have interpreted it as, in a conspiracy theory way, that it's a fake false flag event, that Islam didn't actually attack the United States. I know one guy who has actually the first attack on the World Trade Center on February 26th, 1993, when the van exploded in the World Trade Center. If it had been 30 meters over, would have taken down the North Tower and it would have fallen into the South Tower. But that didn't happen. So obviously God delayed the falling of the Twin Towers to happen at 9/11. But people have interpreted these things. Some people see 9/11 as some kind of event, but only Jeff was able to lay it down in a line and show its connection to Millerite history. And I think that's the most important aspect of what Jeff brought. So when we start to reject 9/11, what we're doing is we're really rejecting the lines. And we see this with Mark Bruce and the way that he interprets 9/11, that everything up to there was darkness. You see it with Parminder and how he's interpreting 9/11. He doesn't accept testimonies 9/11 as talking about 9/11. He just sees all these things as applications. So we just have so much darkness that comes when you reject light that God has revealed. You go into darkness. All new light, if it is light, will establish, it will be based upon established truths, and it will make those old established truths shine brighter. And so everything that's been unveiling or being unsealed in this line right now has made everything, Adventism, the Old Testament, the New Testament, our line itself, it's made it shine brighter. It's not taken away from it. It hasn't rejected the foundation that was laid. And so I know it's a kind of a long answer to your question, but I think it's an important point that people need to know, is that the way that 9/11 is understood by Jeff is foundational. You can't reject it and still be, accepting light. You will go into darkness if you reject it.
I witnessed on TV that happening.
Yeah.
On 9/11, and at the time I began doing some research, but I also listened to several of the leaders in our church speak and evangelists, and I never did hear anybody go back to 9/11 and try to draw out any reality from prophecy at all. And I just was like, I don't know what to do with this. I couldn't seem to make headway with it. And so I just basically said, Lord, I need help to see this. And finally, quite a bit longer later, I guess I was ready to receive it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, some truths took a while for me to accept, like the pioneer view on the daily. I'd only ever heard the new view of the daily, and in 2017, I'd read a paper of Jeff's, or 2007, pardon me. I read a paper of Jeff's on the daily, and it didn't click at all. I just thought, this doesn't even make any sense. I've never heard of such a view, dealing with the two desolating powers, paganism and papalism, and so forth. So, there's obviously a time in which God prepares us, to receive light.
Yes.
But, so, you could say, people coming now are 11th hour workers. In a sense, you could say the Nethinim are 11th hour workers, in that they come in to join us at the Sunday law. And that's probably a better way to look at the Nethinim, if you're going to give them another parallel, is to say they're the Protestants, but they're also 11th hour workers. They're not Seventh-day Adventists who come and join us at the Sunday law. But even within the line of the priests, we have people who come in later, and you never look at where you were as an individual. You don't have to be at 1989 accepting a message to be a priest. You're a priest because you accept the message at the time when the priests are giving that message. Right?
Thank you very much.
Okay. So, to me, that's as far as I can go with these lines, at the present moment. Now, I think as we pass through the events that are happening in the future, maybe there's going to be more clarity on these lines. But this, to me, is the simplest way to understand the lines, because the pattern comes from Millerite history, And everything that I've seen in the groups that have left have destroyed the lines. And I can see the purposes that Parminder had and that Mark Bruce had and that others had in how they looked at things like 9/11 and even Chawatu with his emphasis upon sunset, which he tried to say that 2014 was sunset based on his pattern that he had got from Psalm 23. I think there was some truths to what he was trying to get at, but there was also a confusion in there. And Parminder used that 2017 understanding of Chawatu's to actually look like he was supporting 9/11 at the very same time that Parminder was undermining 9/11. He looked like he was the champion, supporting 9/11 by attacking Chawatu. And that's the one of the ways he really started to get recognized, even though he had already been made an elder back in 2016 and been given the responsibility of organization. But because of how he attacked Chawatu, the way that he did it, it shut down any sort of conversation. People were scared to present something contrary to anything Parminder was saying. And when I was there in 2018, and Parminder first presented at the School of the Prophets in September, his first presentation was on how we need to be able to share and to study without being scared about sharing ideas that differ from the teacher. And, that sounded really good, except that you couldn't do it. It was a front. It was a way of covering his tracks by appearing that he was open when in reality he was closed. And he wanted people to reveal that they had differences so he could deal with them. That was the reason that he wanted things to be open. But people were still too scared. I was even too scared to oppose anything that Parminder said back in 2018. Because I knew if I did, I would be out. And that just seemed very, very clear. So when we look at how the message was attacked and how these lines were attacked, they were attacked from within, and they were attacked very subtly by introducing false concepts, or also by using or misusing truth in a way that it undermined truth. So it's a mixture of truth and error. And it was very cleverly done. There's no doubt about it that when you look back and you see the things that Parminder was saying, that he had a purpose in them, that they weren't purposeless. He had an agenda that he wanted to meet. Now, some other people like Mark Bruce weren't really very clear on what they were trying to do. He just wanted to be the leader. He wanted FFA. He wanted to lead in it. But he still had introduced ideas, and one of them that was Jeff was a prophet, because he wanted to set up himself as a prophet. Parminder utilized that teaching of Bruce's to become a prophet himself, because what he wanted is Jeff to be a prophet, so that Jeff could then give the mantle over to him. He could be Elisha, and Tess could be Samuel Snow or whatever she wanted to call herself. She could be the prophetess, replacing spirit of prophecy, because really Parminder had no interest in the spirit of prophecy and the teachings of the spirit of prophecy, because that's another dispensation. So you can just see why this is important. So this is my examinations of the lines. I'm not saying that this has to be accepted. I'm saying that this needs to be studied. And if there's light in it, then we accept it. But I see everything here, as far as I can see it, it supports what we already understand. And I can't see in any way in which it would undermine our message. Now, maybe somebody sees something different. Maybe they see that I'm undermining the message in this way. If they do, it's their responsibility to show us and to show me where that is. But I don't see it undermining the message. I don't see it undermining FFA or Jeff. I don't see that it's setting up anybody else to replace Jeff, other than, the Holy Spirit we know is in control. And so we can trust that God's in charge, not as a way to reject FFA and the leadership that God has given us, or to reject things that our fellow brethren teach or say because we disagree with it. That's not the purpose of seeing that the Holy Spirit's in charge. It's just to understand that as we go through a very trying time, because we're going to go through a very difficult time, after July 18th, no matter what happens. It's going to be a difficult time. We have to know that God is in charge. And we have to know that the Holy Spirit has been leading us this far, and that we have to continue going no matter what happens. And that to me is the main emphasis that we have right now, that we have to see, is that God is in this, and that this is not about any person. It's not about Jeff. It's not about FFA, because some of these things may not survive as we move ahead. You know, institutions can be dismantled by governments. Buildings can be taken over by governments. We can end up impoverished. We could see, as one guy suggests, all the satellites are going to be gone. Our communication is going to break down. We won't have anything to stand on. Ellen White says that all earthly support will be removed. Now, she's talking, of course, about the time of Jacob's trouble. But of course, we are experiencing that in this movement, within the movement of the priests. And so we're going to find that we're going to have to stand on our own. And that does not mean attacking our brethren and saying that I know what's truth. It's going to be because we trust what God has done in the lives of others, what God has done in Jeff's life, what God has done through FFA, what God has done in revealing this light to us, what God has done in our lives personally. And we have to trust in that, in spite of how we feel, in spite of what we see. And that to me is the important message about these lines, because these lines can guide us. They can let us know where we're at, and they can allow us to look back on events in the past and connect it with where we are now. And that's what Jeff's doing. If you look at his presentations from yesterday, they're not just about some knowledge about what's going to happen. They're actually knowledge that we can understand when we start to go through an experience of where we are at. And if we know where we're at, in spite of what we see, we may be in darkness, we may be walking through the valley of the shadow of death, but we can know where we're at. We can still be following Christ in the sanctuary above. And that to me is really the important point of all of this. It's not having an intellectual correct understanding of how the lines work, because sometimes our understandings aren't going to be complete. But we need to know that God has been leading this movement. And when I look at the other movement and I see the types of ways in which they relate to things, I want to know, well, what's Parminder saying today? If what I believe now, is that true? Well, I don't know. Do you have some new light that we don't believe this anymore? These are the types of questions that they ask. And so we need to have Christ as the one that we look to as we support our brethren and as we trust that God is working in their lives. So that's sort of my rant there. I have no idea what time it is. Oh, that's not going to work. Okay, so that's not too bad. Now, so next week, I'm going to do a review of the entire line. And Stephen says that he's going to do a presentation on the Exodus. Right, Stephen?
Yes.
Okay. And so we'll probably actually start out next week. And I think it's pretty easy to do, right? I've never done it where I put somebody else as the main. I think I can give the control over to you. I can just.
Yes.
Right. And then you can be in charge of it. And then you just switch it back to me if you feel like relinquishing the power and control. And then I can finish off, and I'm just going to do a review of the lines, the whole, right from creation to our time, and try to touch on some of the highlights, some of the important things that we need to understand, the main waymarks of how we got to our message and the basic structure of chronology. So, so some of it will be review, and I'm not going to go into detail on it, but I'm just going to lay out the whole drawing of that. Depending on how much time Stephen gives me, it will depend on how much detail we will add to that. So we got about another 15 minutes. Any more thoughts on this or any other topics that you have? It doesn't have to be about this.
Well, you mentioned about northern Israel being two-horned power, and you connect that to being Dan and Bethel.
Yes.
But I haven't heard that before. Why would you say that? It's a two-horned power. Normally, a two-horned power we would relate to being the whole state of Israel,
Okay.
being the southern and the northern kingdom.
Okay. Well, this isn't something new that originated with me. So this is something that I've heard taught a lot. So we know that obviously Israel ends up being divided into two kingdoms, right? So we would have Judah and Israel, and we would often argue that that's the two-horned power nature of God's people, right? It's divided into two groups. But we do know that northern Israel represents the Protestants, and the Protestants arrive in 1798 as a two-horned power at the end of a 25-20. And we know that northern Israel, when it divided, created these two altars at Dan and Bethel. And Dan represents the judge, because Dan means the judge, and judge is the state. And Bethel means the house of God, so that's the church. So you have in northern Israel within itself the symbols of church and state in their worship. So when we get to the United States in 1798, and this is going to happen 25-20 years after Hoshea is taken captive, which marks the beginning of their 25-20. For northern Israel, we know that northern Israel is scattered, never to be gathered, right? So we know that there are no groups out there that were taken captive by Assyria that are still practicing Judaism. They were basically integrated within these other religions, and they didn't survive. So we don't have, like, the Danites are not the people in Ireland, as British Israelis and teaches, things like that. So we know then that their gathering was not literal Israel that was gathered in 1798. It was the spiritual counterpart of literal Israel, which was the Protestants. The Protestants' churches, they were the ones who replaced the Jews with the close of probation in 34 AD, and they became the Protestants. Now, of course, it was the Catholics, it was just Christians, and then you had this split, the Catholics and the Protestants. But the Protestants have a reform line, the Protestant Reformation. That's a reform line, and we've Tamina did his studies on that. It's very, very interesting, the reform line of Luther and so forth. But in 1798, the United States now come as this two-horned power, and they're connected then with northern Israel. But we know that Judah is their line ends in 1844, and that's connected with the Seventh-day Adventists. So there's a gathering that happens after 1798, the gathering of northern Israel, of the Protestants. But after 1844, the gathering of Judah occurs, and that's the Seventh-day Adventists. Now in 34 AD, it's Judah, technically, that has their probation closed with the stoning of Stephen, because northern Israel is long gone. All you have is Judah and Benjamin, right? Paul's a Benjamite. And you do have some Levites, obviously, that were there in Judah. So you do have priests and Levites. But the point is, the probation closed for Judah specifically in 34 AD. So it's for the southern kingdom. And from then on, God has no denominated people until the Seventh-day Adventist Church rises in 1863. Because Ellen White, if you read it, what she says about denominated people, she was clear that God had a denominated people. But nowhere in that history do we have a denominated people until 1863. Now, Angela says, plus Jeroboam, so this is in 977, used or appointed counterfeit priests to compare them to the evangelicals around Trump, although they seem to be propping them up to further their papal agenda. Right, so, obviously we have the false priests of the northern kingdom. And we know that the north also affected the south. So when Judah went to whoring after other gods, they were the gods of northern Israel. Manasseh, he was following the gods of northern Israel. So we can see that obviously that we have this parallel between Protestants and northern Israel and Seventh-day Adventists in Judah. And I think that's clear. And you would have to look at the two horns of these two golden calves symbolizing republicanism, Protestantism would parallel Dan and Bethel. So I'm surprised you actually haven't heard that, because I've heard it lots of times. Or maybe I interpret it differently than you might have heard it, but understood it differently. I don't know.
Well, I've heard Dan and Bethel being related to church and state.
Yeah.
And there you have a combination of church and state occurring when they're mentioned there in 977 BC.
Yeah.
But in 1798, there's a separation of church and state.
But exactly. What happens is, but you see, the end and the beginning can be opposites, right?
Okay.
Right. So because when the United States rises, it rises as a revival. It's the start of a revival, a reformation that's completing the judgment that was given to northern Israel. The United States starts with a reform line that's going to have a separation of church and state, where Dan and Bethel were a connection of church and state. But then the United States fails in its purpose. Its first horn falls. And then in our history, the second horn falls. So it has horns like a lamb, but it spake as a dragon, and it's going to speak in its decrees and its laws, right? Its legislation. So that's how I understand it. So the separation of church and state, obviously in 1798, they're not connected, but it's still connected in the idea of church and state at the beginning, at the beginning of the 2520, because northern Israel is typifying Protestantism. And that to me just seems very clear. And that's why the joining of the two sticks, because the two sticks are the two 2520s. And the joining of the two sticks is going to occur during the image of the beast test. Which I've understood, I think, since 2015, when Jeff started bringing out the joining of the two sticks. And so to me, I wrote a paper back then on the two sticks, their separation and joining. So, so the Protestants have to join with, the Seventh-day Adventists at the Sunday law if they want to be, if they want to join, because that's going to be the test for them. That's the test for Christians, if you want to put it that way, for people who understand the truth. Now, sure, there might be some people who were not aware of things, and as time goes on, they're going to join, and they might be classified as Protestants. But when I'm talking about Protestants before the Sunday law, these are converted Christians who have been studying God's word, who understand the Antichrist. Many of them are already Sabbath keepers. And they're the ones who have not fallen. That is, they're not nominal Protestants who are joining us at the Sunday law. These are serious Protestants. These are the people who put out the documentaries on the history of the Reformation and the history of the King James Bible and all this, but they're just not connected with Adventists. And those are the ones that are going to join us at the Sunday law. Maybe some of the Messianics and so forth. But it's going to be a struggle for them because they have some false teachings. Some of them believe in literal Israel as being fulfilling prophecy. And so that's going to be a difficult thing for them to sort out, because they have to choose now, do they accept Trump and the Q conspiracy? And do they accept that, a lot of these, charismatic ideas and so forth? Or are they going to be able to distinguish, that this is the wrong direction, that Trump, even though they've maybe seen him as a hero, that they're going to recognize that what he's doing is wrong? I don't know. That's going to be up to those individuals. But the ones who understand the principles, who've developed their character of Christ, will know which side to stand on. And that can only be Protestants. I don't think it can be atheists and Catholics and all these other groups. Maybe as individuals here and there, but I'm just saying overwhelmingly, it's going to be Protestants who join with us. But after that time, you have Edom, Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. And that's going to represent the New Age movement. It's three symbols, right, that are there. It's going to represent that New Age movement, who are and atheists and Hindus and Buddhists and all those people who aren't Christians and maybe even Catholics, of course, because it says they escape out of the hand of the papacy. So those people are going to be the martyrs that come in. I mean, many people will be martyrs too, who aren't going to be able to go through the time of Jacob's trouble. But those people who come in aren't going to have the knowledge or the capability to understand going through the time of Jacob's trouble. It just won't be enough time for them to learn that. What was the question?
No, that's okay, thanks.
I don't remember what the question was.
I was just saying about,
Oh,
I
yeah.
recognize the two horns being Judah and northern Israel, but not just northern Israel by itself.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I just kind of went off.
And I had a question.
Okay, Chris.
On the bottom right corner of your little diagram there on the board,
Mm-hmm.
you put a date by the second coming. Did you intend to do that? A year?
Okay, so this is the line of the priests, and this second coming then is Paneum. Now, it's really 20 to 21 because I look at these as periods of time. So that would be December 25th, 2021. That's the end of Paneum. That's the end of the line of the priests. So after that time, the line of the priests does not continue. Their role has ended, right?
Okay.
The Sunday law, or just before the Sunday law, because we say it's the Sunday law, but really it's a Sabbath, and the next day, December 26th, would be Sunday. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's December 26th is the Sunday law, but it may not be that day. It may be that it's enacted and there's a whole bunch of stuff that we don't understand. But as far as the line of the priest, we know it ends then. So there is no more, we can't see, there can be no more predictions beyond December 25th, 2021. We were stuck in this so-called time setting by the new movement. But this time setting has been a testimony against the new movement. So Parminder brought in this time setting, thinking that he could use it to further his ends. But in reality, it's been the thing that has condemned him. Because when Jeff got up on September 7th, 2019, and I'm doing that calculation back to October 13th at noon, and I'm there at September 7th at noon, I realized that Jeff is fulfilling the time that he is supposed to arise to oppose the new movement. And it just fits into this structure. And it created what we call the Midnight Chiasm, which is an amazing chiasm, but it also, the Midnight Chiasm parallels the 777 chiasm. So these are things that are extremely unlikely to occur. But if Parminder's group is saying that everything we're teaching is just numerology and we're doing magic and I'm Simon Magus and all these crazy things that they're saying about this movement, we know that's not true. But the reason why they have to do that is because if people actually looked at what we're doing, they would see that Parminder is completely misrepresented. They take the analysis we have, so we analyze things after the fact, and we can see that there's these mathematical consistencies, coincidences that exist. And he portrays it as that's how we actually derived our dates, but that's not how we derived our dates. We derived our dates using line upon line, using existing prophecies in the past that extended into the future, based upon the 25-20 principle, based upon Ezekiel, based upon Revelation 9. And we didn't just find coincidence in dates and numbers and then decide that we're going to, choose July 18th because it's 252 days past November 9th and we like the number 252. And that's how he portrays it. But what we did is we actually went back into the past and we looked at what happened and we saw these symbols that existed and that these symbols existed into the future. And then when we found that July 18th produced Samuel Snow's letter structure, like November 9th, July 18th, October 13th, June 9th, all these dates that we had established, when we found that they actually produced the structure of Samuel Snow's letters, that's something that just becomes absolutely amazing. And then when we find that Josiah Litch's prophecy produces this 26th day of the 4th month, and it can extend into the future, and I connected the Mayan calendar, and we just have multitudes of things piling upon each other.
Mhm.
The new movement has to ignore all that because it's actually a testimony against them. And so they have to attack the chronology. And the chronology has always been a testimony against the false movements. And the chronology has been attacked right from the beginning, from 2014, when I presented the chronology on October 20th and 21st at the camp meeting there in Arkansas. People walked out of the meeting saying that this is a waste of our time. And right away, I was being attacked by people within the movement for what I was presenting, first by Dwayne Dewey, and then later on by Mark Bruce. And they were seeing that what I was doing was undermining the message, when in reality, it was supporting the message. So, so chronology becomes important in that context. And that's something that God has done. Chronology is just the chronology of the Bible. But I happened to find it. I think one of the reasons why God had me find it is I can take a lot of criticism. That's just part of my character. So, somebody else who maybe was a bit more sensitive would have given up. But and I'm also patient, so I can just wait until God takes care of things. A lot of people would have tried to push their ideas, and I never did that. I just studied and found that everything that I was studying was being supported by what FFA was doing. And so I was confident that in the end, all that chronology would be recognized. And if not, then it was just for me. It wasn't something that they had to understand. So I would accept that. So I never made it a personal issue about me, because I'm doing chronology, that it somehow makes me important, or that other people had to listen to it. If people wanted to listen to it, that was great. But I know it's true because God has continually witnessed that it's true. And that to me is really amazing. But that's what you have to do, is you have to allow God to take the work the reins of the work into his own hands. And that's what I believe he's done. He's controlled everything that's happened. And we should just trust in him. And chronology gives us that trust because it's something objective outside of ourselves. If I just had the subjective, interpretation of events and stories, it can look good, but, you can always think you're fooling yourself. But when I do a mathematical calculation of how likely or unlikely something is, and I get over 100 zeros, then I know that there's no way that I'm just deceiving myself, unless I'm in some kind of delusionary state. And I actually think that, those numbers are real, but, I'm just actually drawing a, chicken scratch on the board or something. But I believe that that's not true. But, because other people they'd have to also be just as deluded as me. So, it's something objective outside of myself. Other people can say, yeah, what you're doing, I can see it. It's real. I can do the math. It's real. So it's not just my own personal feelings about something or my own personal subjective interpretation of something. But that's the other problem. If we come to like these numbers and these dates, I can always trust that God has organized these things. That's very clear. I don't always trust my interpretation of the events in the future. I trust that God knows, and I do really believe July 18, 2020 is going to be an attack on Nashville by Islam. But if it isn't, I'm not going to question the objective truths. I would question the subjective element, which is my interpretation of events. But there's no way that I can deny all this that's happened. And the Millerites had that same witness, because the 2,300 days, and the 70 weeks, and the 2520, it was really hard for them to deny that God had led. Miller could say, well, I didn't understand the event. I'm just going to have to keep waiting. But they knew that God had led. Now, many people, of course, eventually did reject and said, well, we must have had a wrong starting date. But then they rejected the idea that God had actually led them. And that was a real problem. That we have to accept that God is leading us in spite of what we see, and that's faith. And these lines are what are going to test our faith, because these are something objective outside of ourselves. And so we can't just trust in our feelings. We have to trust in what God has revealed. So, again, I don't remember what the comment was.
Amen.
Yeah, but, I mean, I have obviously, personal feelings about all this stuff. Because one is, and I've said this before, but I feel a little guilty at times, being responsible to some degree for finding these things, and then other people spending money, putting out a newspaper ad and putting up a billboard and doing mail outs, and I kind of feel like, oh man, if something doesn't happen, like I feel really bad, that other people listen to me. But, I know God is behind it. And so I can be confident that even if things don't happen the way that we expect, God is still behind it. And we still have to warn people. Like you couldn't, with a clear conscience, have the belief that Nashville is going to be hit with the nuclear bomb and do nothing, right? You have to do something. And so, it's you get mixed feelings about this. I mean, obviously over the next 41 days that we got, it's going to get hard to sleep at night, even though it's not been easy right now. And then whatever we go through then, it's going to be even more difficult. So anyway, that should be good for today. And let's close in prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful for the light that has come our way, and that you've worked in our lives in showing us our sins, bringing a conviction that we need you every hour. And we pray for our church. We pray for those that we love and care for. We know, Lord, that the only way that we can benefit them is by believing and following the truth, to be living examples. And we just ask, Lord, that you can use us to your glory. Thank you for the time that we've had to study, especially over the last couple of months. And we pray for the study next week for Stephen, that you can help him prepare, and that we can bring together all these lines of history, the whole structure of prophetic chronology, in a way that we can see how God has led, not just in the past, but also in the present and in our lives. And we pray that you can be with us, of course, in the study coming up on Thursday, dealing with Daniel 11 and understanding those things. And we need, Lord, this light as we approach July 18th, to have confidence in you. Help us to study personally and diligently, and help us to recognize our need of you. Thank you for hearing our prayer and for the fellowship that we can have with one another and with you. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.